we start working soon. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. But today I'm going to be talking about a journey with shorebirds. So for those of you who don't know what shorebirds are already, shorebirds are the sandpipers, plovers, and small water birds that you'll often see at the edge of water, the edge of the Great Lakes, places like that, that tend to breed up in the Arctic, many of them, and they will undergo, my file has been converted. Perfect. Loading slides. Can you see that? Are you guys able to see the presentation? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm primarily going to be talking about birds that spend their summer up in the Arctic parts of North America, particularly on the north slope of Alaska, where I've been really lucky to spend the past 3 summers of my life working with these birds. So I'm going to try and give you an idea of the diversity among shorebirds, why you should care about them as a group of birds, and some of the amazing things that they do throughout their lives. So as I was saying, they're a small type of water bird that you might see. You don't generally see them in your daily life. But the area where we're going to be focusing is up here, like I said, the North Slope of Alaska. The green arrow, zooming in a bit more, right on the edge of the Arctic Ocean up here. And going in even closer, on Google Earth, you can actually see the places where we live. So I have spent the past 3 summers of my life in the lower leftmost yellow tent on that left-hand blob. So while we're up there, we're working on several species of birds. This is the semi-palmated sandpiper. This is the species I'll probably talk most about today, and kind of is a good example of general shorebirds and some of the amazing things that they do. This is a small bird, maybe slightly larger than sparrows you might see in your yard or bushes, and it is a truly extraordinary creature for some of the things that it does. I'm going to start off by just going through the sort of species that we see up there to give you an idea of the actual biodiversity of the Arctic, and then a little bit of history about each bird, some of the interesting things that we see up there, what we do, and then tying it into a kind of more global scale where these birds are migrating south to Central or South America, and what we see kind of in the lower 48 from these very impressive little creatures. So like I said, this is a semi-palmated sandpiper. This is kind of a bread and butter species for us up there. We spend most of our summer finding nests and capturing these guys, which I'll go into more later. We also deal with the pectoral sandpiper, which is a slightly larger bird. This one might be a little bit bigger than a robin. The males have spectacular displays, which I'll talk about a bit more later on. And these spend the summers up in the Arctic and will go down to South America to winter for the other half of the year. This is a dunlin. This is another species of shorebird that actually spends winters quite often in the United States. Has a nice black belly and a reddish back. Quite striking bird. You can see here he's actually singing, trying to attract a mate in the early summer up there. The other species that we deal with are the red phalarope, pictured here. Pretty different bird than many of the other shorebirds, very strikingly colored, as you can see. And also they are what is known as pelagic. So they are a group of birds that spend their summers on land, and they spend their entire winters and migration seasons far offshore, and they might not even go within sight of land for the other 10 months of the year when they're not breeding. So it's a very interesting kind of life history. There's large groups of birds, some fish, and even sea turtles and other things like that that have this pelagic lifestyle. We have another kind of phalarope that we deal with there. It's always a fun word to say. This is the red-necked phalarope, which is another aptly named bird with the great red on the neck. interesting thing about phalaropes, so revisiting the red phalarope here, you might notice this one is a little bit drabber than the other one that I showed before, not quite as vivid. And phalaropes are unusual in shorebirds and in birds in general, in that the sex roles are entirely reversed. So in most birds, the males are all the attractive ones that display for the females. There are more males trying to compete for each female, and the the females lay the eggs, tend the nest, and will spend most of the time caring for the young, whereas the males have minimal investment. In phalaropes, this is a male that is drably colored, and this is the female again, a much brighter individual. So for phalaropes, the females are actually the brightly colored ones that attract the males. All the females are competing for the male's attention. And then when a male picks a female, she will go lay the eggs in a nest that he makes, and then that's all she'll do with the young. She'll leave that nest, she'll never see the chicks again. The male will incubate the eggs until they hatch, then care for the young, and then he's the sole parent, single dad. And this is true across all phalaropes. There are only 2 species up there. This is a male red-necked phalarope, so you can see no sign of the red neck at all, except for that little hint. And then this is the female, again, the brighter bird, the same thing. The females have the male role in the species, the males have the female. It's an unusual thing in birds, and especially in shorebirds. So there are a bunch of other species of shorebirds up there. Those first ones that I mentioned are ones that we spend most of our time working with, and we do more intensive surveys on them. This is a white-rumped sandpiper, another species that is fairly uncommon up there. And you can kind of tell white-rumped sandpipers by the pinkish or orangish base to the beak and the long wingtips that go beyond the tip of the tail. These guys are really impressive in that they go all the way from northern Canada and the Arctic to the tip of southern South America, a migration route that each way goes 8,000 miles or more. And they have actually sometimes overshot their destination a little bit and gone all the way to Antarctica. So I can imagine that wouldn't be too enjoyable, but they are one of the few, if not the only shorebird that has ever been recorded in Antarctica. This is the Baird sandpiper, another species that breeds up there and winters actually a lot in the Andean mountain range in South America. It's a pretty common bird down there in the wintering grounds, existing in these high elevation lakes in the tens of thousands at times. And just another species we encounter up there. I'm just trying to go through and give an idea of all the different things that use this very unique ecosystem. As you can see, pretty much all the vegetation is very short there. There's some flowers, but there's actually nothing taller than about 5 or 6 inches in the entire landscape up there. You're so far north that the permafrost layer comes up so far in the winter that you actually only have 1 or 2 inches that aren't frozen solid. And so when that happens, you can only support life that has very shallow roots. This is a long-billed dowitcher, a much larger shorebird that we get in small numbers up there. A more uncommon species, but quite attractive. A ruddy turnstone, another species that you get a lot on the coast. They actually like to hang out in Florida sometimes in coastal restaurants and eat French fries from people's plates that they might leave behind. It's kind of an interesting niche that might not have existed too long ago. The buff-breasted sandpiper, which is a personal favorite of mine, and I'll have some more images of them later. They are a very high Arctic species, and they winter down in central South America and have severe conservation issues due to use of grasslands down there by farmers for cattle and other agriculture. Here's the black-bellied plover, a bird that looks like it's wearing a pretty nice tuxedo if you squint and kind of pretend some, but a very striking creature, and they're also fairly common winter residents along many U.S. coasts. Larger, again, these might be bigger than a pigeon somewhat, so fairly sizable bird compared to some of the others. Very closely related to the black-bellied plover is this American golden plover, which is named for the golden spots on its back. Quite a striking creature, and one that we're really lucky to have up there. Really beautiful, beautiful species. We have stilt sandpipers, and yes, they do just keep coming. So even though there is such a seemingly limited ecosystem, this low grass area that is frozen solid and dark for 5 or 6 months of the year really comes to life in the spring and is a true haven for many of these species that don't breed elsewhere. This is a pair of stilt sandpipers, and another nice bird. You don't see them too often. Coming out of the shorebirds, this is a rock ptarmigan. It might look like a golden chicken type thing, and that's basically what it is. They're related to grouse and other sorts of game birds, and they have this beautiful golden coloration for the females that blends into the tundra in the summer. And the males have this beautiful white coloration that blends into the snow in the winter. And so this was early in the season before the male had changed his feathers by molting and basically turned into a more female-looking bird that could hide better from the snow, or in the tundra when there is no snow. Because when you're bright white in the summer and everything is brown, you're not going to survive too long in a world with falcons and owls. The Arctic is also unique, and where I was in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was unusual in that it supports some really unique species. These are called spectacled eider, and they have these crazy looking goggles, and they're really rare. They're a federally endangered species, and they only breed on the coast that joins the Bering Sea in Alaska and adjacent Siberia. And truly beautiful duck, and very unique in both their appearance and where they exist. Not too many other species live the way they do. There are also some gulls up there, but I don't think of gulls as being just seagulls as many people do. This one species in particular is a really striking bird. This is the Sabin's gull, and they have this lovely wing pattern in flight with a nice gray, white, and black contrast. And when you look at them up close, we were lucky to have a few nesting around where we were. You get this beautiful black bill with a yellow tip, and when they call to either their mates to strengthen pair bonds or to other males to drive them away, they have this beautiful, beautiful red inside of their mouth. And in warmer light, you can see the nice gray hood, again with the kind of pseudo candy corn bill with the yellow tip on the black. And the wing pattern really shows sometimes, and this was one of my favorite images that I've gotten in 3 years up there. And just a Sabin's gull alighting on this little island just at the right time. This picture was actually taken at about 3 a.m. One of the interesting things about working in the Arctic is that the sun doesn't set. So we always joke that, well, days of work's over when the sun sets, and we get up there at the beginning of June, we stay until the middle of July, and in that time we never see the sunset. It's kind of a strange way to spend the summer at times. So speaking of when we get there, this is the view when we land from our plane. We're on a frozen lake on June 3rd, and all there is snow. It's just a world that has just kind of been freed from winter and is starting to thaw, and it's a challenging landscape. For us, there's this, on the right edge of the horizon, there's 2 little bumps you might be able to make out, and those are in fact our tents. We have to haul all our stuff in, set the tents up, and then haul everything about 1.5 kilometers from the plane landing site to our place, our camp, to set up for the season. So what are we doing there? When we first get there, there are birds flying around displaying and having a grand old time, and they are some of the ones that I've showed before, some others, and this is a semi-palmated sandpiper. You can see this little protrusion on his leg is actually a marker that we placed on him that has a unique identifier on it called a flag, an alphanumeric leg flag. And we're marking these birds to learn more about their fidelity to breeding sites, to learn more about their migration patterns, how long they live, and various other things. The display season is really quite interesting in that a lot of these shorebirds that if you see them down here in the lower 48, they're just kind of meandering along the edge of the water, feeding calmly, quietly. And when they get up to the Arctic, they turn into these crazy beasts that do all sorts of weird things. So this is a pectoral sandpiper. And the male pectoral sandpiper has a very interesting display where he sits on this raised area and gulps air for a little while. And he'll kind of inhale until he inflates this chest air sac that kind of is on his pectoral area, like pectoral muscles. And he'll gulp air until he fills that up. And then he'll fly along and do this crazy booming display that sounds like a distant foghorn or trumpet. And he flies low over the head of a female. And he'll do this repeatedly until she either leaves the area or shows some interest in him, in which case he'll land near her and start doing other crazy displays as well. But it's amazing seeing these birds at different times of year and just how totally different they are. We also have the buff-breasted sandpiper, which I mentioned earlier, and it really has one of the most impressive displays out there, in my opinion. So the males, first off, will be fighting a lot and kind of establishing their little dominance hierarchies. And they take part in what is called a lek. So a lek is where several individuals of a species, usually the males, will gather together and display for the females in a centralized location. So this allows the females to come and judge a bunch of males simultaneously and see which one they choose as the most suitable for mating. So the buff-breasted sandpiper starts by running along, holding his wing up crazily, and does that for a while, runs back and forth. Then he kind of sticks it up like a flag and waves it back and forth, out to the side, then straight up, back and forth, just kind of limply waving it to attract a female. From the underside, it looks like this bright white flag. You can see it from over half a mile away at times. And he runs back and forth. It's kind of a little chicken run. And then when a female starts getting close, he gets really excited. First thing, he kind of sits back, throws both his wings up like this, and starts to do a little vocal display in addition to the wings up. Then as it gets more intense, wings go further back until eventually he's almost falling over with the effort of displaying to try and impress this female. Sometimes you'll have multiple males displaying to one female. In this one, she looks fairly interested, but who knows whether she chose one of those males. And sometimes you will have one male displaying to multiple females. And I always say that you've never been judged until you've been a male buff-breasted sandpiper. So if you see here, just to the left of his head, the female's head is actually touching his wing. Those two that are in there so close are just examining every inch of him. And in this case, they were not satisfied. They flew off after this display, and he kind of wandered off defeated. But it's truly an amazing thing to watch, and it'll happen very spontaneously. A couple females will be in an area, 4 or 5 males will fly in, do this crazy display. 5 minutes later, there will be no buff-breasted sandpipers in the region. As the season goes on and the displaying is kind of winding down, it really gets to nesting season. So you can see here there's still a lot of snow. That mountain range in the background is the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. It's still all snowbound, but around in the tundra you can see some brownish areas are starting to appear. So when this happens, it's nesting season. The terrain there is very interesting. This image, each one of these little polygons, as we call them, is maybe 10 meters by 15, 20 meters. So pretty large scale landforms, and a very interesting thing that is formed by thawing and freezing ice. So we tromp around in these polygons all day looking for nests in hip waders, and wearing hip waders for a long time is an interesting way to spend a summer. So here is kind of the easiest version of a nest to find. This is a ruddy turnstone nest, and it's pretty obvious. Nests tend to be they have 4 egg clutches, which both fits under a bird very nicely and also is the most thermally efficient way to have eggs. So the 4 eggs both they'll nestle in such a way that it makes it easier for the heat to be retained when the bird is off the nest. This is interesting because even though they normally have 4 eggs, this is actually 5 eggs in one nest. And this is a semi-palmated sandpiper nest. And this was the first time that it has ever been documented that a semi-palmated sandpiper had 5 eggs in its clutch. And so we actually came back the next day and it was back down to 4. So we don't know what happened, but this is as far as I know, the only picture that exists of a semi-palmated sandpiper nest with 5 eggs. So here's one of the individual eggs. This was found out of a nest by a predator. We didn't remove this from a nest since we are there just to monitor and observe, not remove the eggs from the nests. And it kind of shows the size. We're dealing with very small eggs there, and beautiful cryptic coloration that blends right in with the overall tundra appearance. Here is another nest. This is one that's more well concealed. It's a buff-breasted sandpiper nest, and there are the 4 eggs here, the full clutch, and this is kind of their goal. We want to find as many nests as possible. Birds on the nests can be hard to see. Just a little left of center here, you can see the head of a pectoral sandpiper poking out, viewing off to the right, and they are incubating the eggs right now. Here's a red-necked phalarope sitting on a nest. Again, this is the male because of the interesting sexual reversal in this species. And here on the right, we have a long-billed dowitcher laying down, pretending that he did not exist. In the lower right here, we also have kind of the pinnacle of camouflage. This is a rock ptarmigan that has a very interesting camouflage method. And you can basically not even see it, even when you're standing just a couple meters away. Here's a shot of that same rock ptarmigan on the nest with our camp tents in the background. So one of the things we do for the birds there, like I mentioned before, is the banding. So this bird, as you can see, has a unique identifier, EVC, as well as a unique color combination, the white, dark blue, white. And so this bird is identifiable anywhere in the world where it would be seen. It's the only semi-palmated sandpiper that has this same combination. So we capture the birds on the nests after finding them by using what is called a bow net. This is a bow net that is ready to capture. So it's fully opened here, and right in the middle there is a nest. And we set the trap, go off, wait for the bird to come back, and then when the bird is on the nest, we pull the bow net to trigger it snapping over the bird. We're able to capture the bird, doesn't hurt the bird, doesn't hurt the nest, and we are able to mark that bird. So when we take the bird in the hand, we're putting these unique identifiers on it that enable us to identify when it comes back year after year, see how long these birds live, and if the bird is seen elsewhere in the world, we can figure out where these semi-palmated sandpipers are going. And so kind of get more information on the population, where it's going, how it's doing as a whole, and just learn more about these unique species. Another interesting thing that you can learn from banding operations, you can see here this flag is blue. You might have noticed that the ones in the past were green. Blue means it was banded in Brazil, and we were actually amazingly lucky to, while working in the North Slope of Alaska, which is a long ways from Brazil, encounter a bird that had been banded in northeast Brazil on its breeding grounds. And so this was a very interesting finding, that we didn't know that the birds from Brazil were actually breeding in Alaska. They were thought to be the ones that were breeding in Canada for this population. So we got that, and then here, next year, we had a different bird from Brazil. So amazingly, in the population of over 3 million birds, out of the 2,000 birds that were been banded in Brazil, 2 of them turned up on our tiny little 5 square miles in Alaska. It's quite amazing, and who knows the odds, lottery odds. And another thing that we've been doing to learn more about these species and conservation efforts is a better way to inform conservation efforts is by geolocators. So this is a semi-palmated sandpiper that is equipped on the leg with a geolocator, that small instrument that you can see hanging from its upper left leg. And this is a geolocator off of a bird. And they're these very new and unique instruments that have two data points that they're taking. Light levels, and they have a very accurate clock, so they're taking time. The combination of time and the amount of light at any given point in the day gives you time of sunrise and sunset and length of day anywhere in the world. This device weighs about 0.4 grams, so very small. The general rule of thumb with putting equipment on the shorebirds is that it has to be less than 3% of the body weight. And so I believe these are about 1% of the body weight of the bird. And so the main limitation with geolocators is that you have to retrieve the bird to get the information off. But when you combine the time of day and length of day, you can actually get the latitude and longitude to within a couple hundred kilometers anywhere in the world. So it's not incredibly precise, but it is close enough that you can kind of figure out these birds are going to Brazil or they're going to Peru in their wintering grounds. And we put out 30 of these 2 years ago, and we got back 13 of them this year, and they're currently in for analysis. And so hopefully within the next couple months, we'll figure out where some of these birds are going. And we're looking for nests all the time and trying to study these shorebirds on the breeding grounds. And there are a lot of other birds, there are a lot of other creatures out there looking for nests. This is an Arctic fox, and they find nests as efficiently or more efficiently than we do. And when they find it, it does not exist after they have. So this is an Arctic fox in its winter garb with the nice whitish coat. And then in summer, when they're no longer blending in with the snow, they get this nice brown coat, and they really are much more camouflaged in the tundra. They have really incredible noses and will just sleuth out shorebird nests to an amazing degree. Other predators that we have in the area include gulls, like this glaucous gull that has a cackling goose, a kind of goose egg in its mouth. And they will generally prey on the larger birds as opposed to the shorebirds that we're studying. But they are still pretty prevalent nest predators. Also Jaegers. Jaegers are related to gulls. Jaeger actually means hunter in German. And this is a parasitic Jaeger, and as its name might suggest, it tends to find other birds that have already gotten food some way, so maybe a tern or a gull that might have a fish, and then they will basically dogfight with that other bird in midair until they will force it to drop the fish, and then they go eat its fish. They will also eat lemmings, though, and other small mammals, and occasionally birds' nests. So later on in the season, everything has gotten greener up in the Arctic, and the summer kind of changes. You start getting some mammals coming through. One of the really unique things about being in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is the caribou herds. This is part of a herd of caribou. There's maybe 80 or 100 animals in this image, and in this herd of caribou, there were probably 35,000 animals that came through right by our tents that we were able to watch and enjoy over the course of several days as they came through on their annual migration. And the season goes on, and we are able to see the changes in weather. It's actually pretty interesting. So here you can actually see a rainstorm coming across the flat tundra up there. When it's flat and you can see for 30 miles, you don't need a weather forecast because you know what's happening. And the weather is changing so much up there as kind of a result of climate change that there are thunderstorms up there now, in addition to much heavier rainfall. And the natives actually don't have a word in their language for thunderstorm and for thunder or lightning. And now thunderstorms are so prevalent up there that it's just a part of summer. So it's a fairly interesting change that even in the past couple decades has been noticeable in the world as a whole. With late season comes a giant increase in the amount of cuteness present in the Arctic as the shorebirds hatch. This is a ruddy turnstone chick, of which an adult was shown earlier on, and they're quite well camouflaged, and at this age, this is probably 1 to 2 days old, they're pretty much entirely dependent on the adults. This is another clutch of buff-breasted sandpipers that is hatched out, still in the nest bowl. You can see that they blend in fairly well. At this scale, you can tell pretty well that they're not grass, but if you were standing up or even just a few meters away, they'd be almost invisible. More cuteness, there is a pectoral sandpiper brood. There are 3 fully hatched animals with 1 egg in the back that still hasn't hatched out yet. Here's a red phalarope brood. One of the interesting things about shorebirds is that their legs come out almost full size when they hatch, whereas the bodies are much smaller. So if you look at the bottommost individual here, you can see that giant thing below his head all the way back to his end is his leg, which is basically as large as the bird itself immediately upon hatching. So they grow into their feet. They're quite comically oversized when they're first hatched out. After several days in the nest, the birds will leave and be tended by the parents for about 15 days or so before they're just left on their own to migrate and head on the journey south. Here is a semi-palmated sandpiper tending for its young. Here's a buff-breasted sandpiper with several young. One of the endearing things that they do in the time just after the birds hatch, the young hatch, is they will incubate them out of the nest, which basically turns into this multi-legged creature where all the 4 young basically snuggle up under the wings and belly feathers of the adult buff-breasted sandpiper. A few days later, and the chicks are getting more grown, and pretty soon they'll be on their own. This one still has entirely fluffy down and is going under to be incubated like in the previous picture. But a little bit longer, and he'll be out. There are also other species around that are hatching left and right. This was just a cute little red-throated loon and its chick that, although not a shorebird, it definitely merits at least worth looking at. And a few days later, this guy his bill is more developed now. This is a young semi-palmated sandpiper, and in a week from now or so, he will be not deserted, but left by his parents, and will be perfectly fine fending on his own. This red phalarope is running along. They can actually swim from birth. That's something that those large legs help with. And within 2 weeks, they will also be on their own. Here's a bit older of a shorebird. So this is a semi-palmated sandpiper that's maybe 14 to 16 days of age, and it is one that now will totally be on its own. The parents will have already migrated south, and they will often form up in little bands of juveniles that will just hang out and roam around the tundra before heading south on their own a few weeks later. The end of the season comes mosquitoes. I have a video, but I couldn't figure out how to get the video to embed in this as well, given that there were already slideshow problems. But the mosquitoes up there are commonly referred to as the Alaskan Air Force due to their prevalence, and we have to wear bug jackets and such all the time. But you can see with the nice flowers comes the migration of us at the end of the season as we leave, as well as the migration of birds. So the yellow tents in the foreground are our camp, going all the way back to the Arctic Ocean in the background. And this green world is totally different from what we experienced at the beginning of the season when we arrived at this snowy, not wasteland, but a snowy realm with the birds at the beginning of June. So as we head south, the birds do as well. And they go all the way as far south as Brazil, as mentioned earlier, Peru, and various other places. But often your local beach can be a great place to see species like this. And it's kind of hard to fathom. This was a semi-palmated sandpiper in partial winter plumage down on Plymouth Beach in Massachusetts. That this little bird has already traveled several thousand miles and will travel several thousand more to Central and South America. and is really, it doesn't weigh more than an ounce. So this bird you could conceivably mail across the states for the cost of one stamp, which might help on its migration a little bit. And yet, even at such a small size, it is able to undergo feats of migration and movement that are unfathomable to us. They go through all sorts of habitats and migration. This is one up at Plum Island, which is a place in northeastern Massachusetts. And there's some sites that are really very valuable and of conservation importance to these species. And here's semi-palmated sandpipers at the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So the Bay of Fundy is fairly well known as the place with the highest tidal variation in the world. They have tidal variation of over 50 feet there, which is a pretty astounding thing to watch as it comes in and out. And as a result of all this water interchange, there's very rich mudflats there that are of critical importance to some shorebird species, especially the semi-palmated sandpiper. And so in this picture, there's probably 2,000 semi-palmated sandpipers. This was part of a flock of 40,000 that were on the beach at one time. Every fall, there are upwards of 500,000 birds that likely pass through there over the course of about 5 weeks, and they're almost all of this species. And an interesting thing is that over the past couple decades, it has been noticed that these birds are declining a fair amount in this particular stopover site. And other surveys in other parts of the world, this hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, on both the breeding grounds and wintering grounds, have given inconclusive evidence as to whether this species is actually declining or increasing. Some surveys in the Guyanas and Venezuela show that it's a critical decline, like less than 50% of the population of 30 years ago, whereas work on the breeding grounds in areas that I was in Alaska and Western Canada are showing increases over the past 40 years. And one interesting thing that might offer some sort of evidence as to why this could be declining or where the decline could be happening is that in the species semi-palmated sandpiper, there is a difference in bill length depending on whether you're in the eastern part of Canada or over in Western Canada or Alaska. And the bills, the beaks is what I'm talking about, bill or beak, could be the longest in Eastern Canada and the shortest in Western Canada. And so over 40 years of monitoring in the Bay of Fundy, they've found that the mean bill length is decreasing. So this either means one of two things, that the eastern populations of semi-palmated sandpiper are decreasing, or that the western populations are increasing in their representation at this location. So in either case, it's interesting to kind of think that just by looking at the length of the bill, you can kind of tell things about how this species is doing. And shorebirds are important because they kind of regulate a lot of these coastal ecosystems. So you can imagine if you have a species that comes through in numbers of 500,000 or more, and they are feeding on these little invertebrates in the mud. If you remove that from the ecosystem, then the invertebrates in the mud won't have predation pressure anymore and will increase in large numbers. They could increase the breakdown of the mud, increase erosion, change tidal flows in these areas, affect all sorts of things, and we don't really know the sort of wider consequences that you could have by removing such a critical species from the ecosystem. And bringing it back to Plymouth again, there are these semi-palmated sandpipers that come through Plymouth Beach, not quite in the numbers of the Bay of Fundy, but in large numbers nonetheless. And it's pretty cool to be able to go down to your local beach, and wherever you are in the US, you have a chance of seeing shorebirds like this or other species that I talked about earlier that undergo these really Herculean migrations every year a couple times. And it's just, I guess, almost inspirational, if you will, that such a small creature can do something like this many times throughout its life. And it seems almost like we should do what we can to continue the existence of these incredible journeys by conserving coastal places, conservation of beaches, mud flats, national wildlife refuges, and researching more and figuring out more about these populations and worrisome trends like the potential decline in semi-palmated sandpiper. There's one bird, another kind of shorebird called the red knot, that is well known for its long migration from northern Canada to southern South America. And one individual was actually flagged many years ago. B95, it's a fairly famous bird, and it has gotten the name moonbird because it has actually flown so far since it was originally captured that it has gone all the way to the moon. And if we give it a few more years, he's well on his way coming back from the moon. And it's a pretty astounding thing. And every time you go and look at a shorebird, you're kind of getting a little glimpse into this life of the journey of shorebirds. So with that, I would like to thank Manomet Center for Conservation Sciences, where I'm working and who made this research in the Arctic possible, and for Goldenrod Foundation for asking me to do this and making it all happen. It was suggested that I go for 45 minutes, and then I'd be happy to take questions now. And thank you, Lindsay. So I just got my bachelor's degree at UMass Amherst in Western Massachusetts last December. And so I have a bachelor's in wildlife ecology and conservation. It was the closest thing I had to ornithology there. And that was about it. I was homeschooled my whole middle school, high school career. So the first time I ever went to school was actually for my undergrad. Field work, I greatly enjoy field work. I kind of actually grew up semi-working at the place I'm working now, Manomet Center for Conservation Sciences, doing landbird banding. And so I was kind of accustomed to field work, but remote field work, like in the Arctic, was definitely an interesting thing. That tent right there that you can see now is where I live I've lived for 45 days for the past 3 summers. And it definitely takes some getting used to. There are no bathrooms. We have a little kind of porta potty-esque things. But since we're also in a wilderness area up there, we have to bring everything in, everything out. So that can also complicate things. So I wouldn't say that I've had any troubles adjusting to field work. I relish being out there in these remote places, but other people that I've worked with out there in past years haven't necessarily enjoyed it as much. And since I am actually working at a banding station right now, I happen to have a bird right here because I figured everybody appreciates seeing a bird. I had someone who I was working with bring this in. It hasn't been waiting here the whole time. But I just happen to have a blue jay right here. So I'll answer your question, but I just thought everyone would appreciate seeing a blue jay. It's a wild, unharmed bird that will be released shortly after, in about 10 minutes. So, do I plan to publish work? Yes, I'm working on actually writing up something in site fidelity in these birds. So a lot of these shorebirds, and especially semi-palmated sandpiper, are really faithful to the locations they come back every year, and will sometimes even use the same nest cup. And I just find it amazing that these birds will fly several thousand miles one way, several thousand miles back, and can find the same square foot of tundra to nest in. And through 5 years of data collected up there, should be able to figure out kind of what is the actual site fidelity in these species. And you can use that to help guide nest searching efforts in previous years. So if you have marked birds, or in subsequent years, if you have a marked bird and you know where it nested last year, and you know that that species nests within 100 meters of its previous nest, then we can talk about finding that bird again right in the same area. And it really will kind of hopefully make fieldwork more efficient in general. Yeah, the Audubon study, that was great, the state of the birds. So how many species will be affected by climate change? The group shorebirds in general are pretty strongly affected because kind of changes in climate regimes and sea level rise and all these other consequences of climate change are really the kinds of things that affect coastal ecosystems quite strongly. And many of these ecosystems are very fragile, like river deltas, where if the water rises by a meter or even less, you might have a difference in the saltwater freshwater interchange, which could change the prey sources. And if you knock out some of these really crucial areas like the Bay of Fundy for semi-palmated sandpiper, then it could spell disaster for some of these species. So shorebirds in general are pretty heavily affected by the consequences of global climate change, and some species more than others. And there's one species, the red knot that I talked about with the moonbird, that the eastern subpopulation of that, it's a subspecies with the name rufa, Calidris rufa, and it migrates from eastern Canada down to South America. And when it's coming back north from South America in the spring, the entire population almost stops over in Delaware Bay. So Delaware, coastal Delaware, and New Jersey. And in this area, it relies on spawning horseshoe crabs. So horseshoe crabs come ashore on the full moon in May, the first full moon in May. And so usually the third or fourth week. And when that happens, they come ashore in the thousands, just thousands upon thousands, and spawn leaving millions of eggs, horseshoe crab eggs. And the whole species, red knot, that whole subspecies of them, relies on these horseshoe crab eggs to have enough fuel to reach their breeding grounds at that stage in their migration. And a disruption in this horseshoe crab cycle would spell disaster for the red knots. There would just be that population is actually potentially going to be listed as an endangered species, federally endangered species. I believe in the next week or so is when it could happen. It's been a proposal that I think is going to pass just due to its sensitivity to the disruption of this one location. How can kids get involved? I guess I would say just kind of be aware, just kind of general awareness of what's going on around you, the fragility of a lot of these ecosystems, just local conservation of coastal regions, be aware of the consequences of things that you're doing, like as trivial as it sounds, compost, recycle, don't do things that are harmful to the environment, and especially just kind of think about actions and ways that you could help. You could volunteer perhaps at local conservation organizations, or figure out a way to enact changes at a local scale, or if there's a way you can figure it out at a grander scale. But generally just kind of understanding the larger consequences of what the effects humans have on the world and the sorts of things that we're affecting and how that affects the world as a whole. So like I was talking about, if you remove shorebirds from this ecosystem, it could cause the invertebrates to get out of hand and potentially change the whole way that that ecosystem works. Impact on biodiversity, exactly. Both very welcome. Thank you. Sounds great. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great day.